After spending several months adjusting to my new life here in Poland, I had to go back to Eastern Europe for personal reasons. I didn't go back to Ukraine and instead went to Ukraine's smaller and least touristy neighbor, Moldova. Now you may be wondering, what is so special about an Eastern European guy going to Eastern Europe? After all, Eastern Europeans do visit Eastern Europe and do live there from time to time. And that is exactly what I thought. As I was planning this trip, I thought this is going to be a completely routine trip, just like countless trips before that, and that I would just go there, I would just spend time, I would just do what I had to do, and I would return an unchanged man. But as it happened, this was a very, very interesting trip for many reasons. After this trip, not only did I understand Eastern Europe in a more unique and profound ways, but I also gained a much greater understanding and appreciation for my life here in Poland. But overall, the conclusions, the things that I learned, the takeaways, I will be sharing with you towards the end of the video. Now, during my stay in Moldova, I mainly stayed in Kishinev and had plenty of time to get acquainted with the city and the city life. I explored the city's beautiful parks and boulevards, admiring interesting buildings and, shall we say, unique balconies. I surveyed Kishinev's largest shopping mall and checked out the prices of the local products. I dined at restaurants ranging from extremely basic to fairly sophisticated. I went beyond the city center to see how regular working class people lived. And throughout the trip, I talked to all kinds of locals, trying to better understand their daily lives, as well as to get a better grasp on the country as a whole. But first, let's rewind and start from the top. Quick background first. Moldova is one of the least visited countries in Europe. It's also one of the poorest countries in Europe. The very first thing I experienced when I landed in Moldova is how green everything was. Huge trees towered above you everywhere you went. Tree-lined streets and boulevards immediately gave the capital city, shall I say, a somewhat exotic feel. After I checked into my 11th floor apartment in the center of the city, I went out to explore the capital. But first, let me show you the apartment where I stayed. It really is a special place. The apartment was situated on the 11th floor in a huge 13-story building that was unlike anything around it. Apparently, that building was fairly well known. Every taxi driver immediately knew it after I mentioned the address. So this is my apartment here in Moldova, in Kishinev, which is the capital of Moldova. Let me give you a quick room tour. Here we have the kitchen. We have kind of a little sofa. We have a kitchen here fully stocked. I'm assuming a gas stove. Yeah, you have everything there. This is the view. And we are somewhere in the center. I am just not exactly sure where the main street is, but it's very, very close to here. This is kind of the view from the 11th floor. We have a kitchen table, nice for working. We have a bathroom right here. Very nice sized bathroom here. We have all this. Washing machine. And here we have the bedroom. And I have a big bed. This is a really nice bed. And unfortunately, it looks like the balcony is closed. Looks like it's closed because I cannot move this thing. But otherwise, it would have been nice with the balcony as well. But looks like they're keeping it for themselves, possibly. We also have an AC unit, which is great for this region because it can get very, very hot in the summer. Really, really nice apartment. And this apartment is about $30 a night here in Moldova. And actually, I got really lucky getting this apartment because it's typically this kind of apartment would be more expensive, but maybe it's with the current situation and things like that. But overall, this is a great place. Huge. Much bigger than the current apartment I have in Warsaw right now. So that's a big benefit. Once I stepped out of the apartment and went outside, I experienced something that I didn't think I would. Culture shock. Yes, for a very brief moment, I felt totally out of my element. I've been living in Poland for the past 3 months, and just being here, I am experiencing a little bit of a culture shock, simply because I haven't been in this part of the world in such a long time, I guess. And yeah, of course, if I stay here for like a couple of weeks, I'm gonna get used to it, but it is interesting. I didn't expect that to happen. I realized that I, as an Eastern European, would need a bit of time to get used to the environment. After several hours of walking around and absorbing the ambience, I became comfortable with the city and the initial culture shock disappeared. The first thing that hits your eyes are the wide boulevards. Boulevards that wouldn't be out of place in any large or mid-sized ex-Soviet city. There are similar boulevards in Kiev, Kharkov, and many other cities all across former Soviet republics. One thing to note is that you have these big boulevards, like this street right here, this main street, and it's very clean. And another nice thing is there are no cars parked here, and that's kind of the Soviet planning that you see in a lot of these former Soviet Union cities. Big wide streets that create this element of grandeur. You also have this in Kiev. You also have this in a bunch of other cities. And I gotta admit, it's really nice. Very clean, taken care of. You got nice trees. Really nice. I mean, it definitely makes you feel that you're no longer in Central or Western Europe. The ability to communicate with locals is super important when I travel. Language is really the gateway to culture. In Moldova, if you speak Russian or Romanian, you'll be able to communicate with everyone, which has contributed to me feeling super comfortable in the country from the start. That is also why I'm diligently forcing myself to learn Polish back in Warsaw. Here in Moldova, the official language is Moldovan, which is essentially Romanian. They might have a couple of words that are loan words from Russian, but the official language is Romanian. But pretty much everybody is bilingual. So pretty much everybody, especially here in the capital, will also speak Russian. Of course, in restaurants, various places, they will start speaking to you in Romanian, since that's the official language. But if you answer in Russian or English or something, if they speak English, they will speak English. But if you speak Russian, they will just switch to Russian like it's nothing and pretty much speak without an accent. So knowing Russian is a huge benefit because you can kind of get around this area. And another thing I want to point out is that even though I am like originally from Ukraine, I feel super comfortable here because this is, you know, they also speak Russian. I understand the people. And so if you are, you know, if you have some experience in any of the other former Soviet Union republics or you're from there, chances are you're going to feel pretty comfortable here, which is a nice thing. Language, customs, understanding the culture, the mentality, really comes in handy. Then there are the huge, seemingly never-ending parks. Also something that's very common in mid-sized to large ex-Soviet cities. And here's one of kind of the big main parks here in the center of the city. We have some kind of a government building on the other side. Maybe it's a parliament of some sort. And then right here we have this really beautiful park. And make note is that there's no trash anywhere. It's all super clean, super taken care of, and just a great place to be during the summer. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised with just how cozy and comfortable the center of the city was. Of course, once you step into a different area or wander into a different neighborhood, the infrastructure rapidly changes into something else. And you know, I'm kind of impressed with the city, with this kind of this main area here. It's really nice, it's really walkable. Really nice sidewalks, cleaned up. Looks like, maybe it was renovated or something. Really, really amazed. Nice little sidewalk right here. Very, very pleasant to walk on. So same thing on the other side. Very cool. Surrounded by trees here. I really do love this part of the world. As is the case in most of the former Soviet Union republics, the wealth is typically concentrated in the center. And so, like center of Kishinev, you're gonna have, a lot of wealth, or at least, a big percentage of the wealth that the country has. And you're gonna have nice restaurants, decent kind of buildings, decent infrastructure. But once you start leaving the center and going outward, outside the center to smaller cities, that infrastructure is gonna start to degrade. My own neighborhood was the perfect example. Although I lived in a tall, modern building with its own little play area for the kids inside, the surrounding area was in a poor shape. My 10-minute walk home from a nearby restaurant was completed in an almost pitch-dark conditions. Throughout my trip, I tried all kinds of different foods, ranging from local and super cheap stolovaya or self-service to fancier lounge-type restaurants. The one time I stopped by a very basic restaurant, it felt as though I was back in my mom's kitchen eating a traditional meal. Sure, it was extremely basic, but it did its job. It was $2.16 at that restaurant. I also enjoyed surveying the more sophisticated restaurants and lounges, allowing myself a minor glimpse of how the other half lives. I also visited the largest mall in Moldova, aptly named Moldova, to get the feel of what kind of shops there are in the country. It gave me an opportunity to survey the availability and prices of local goods and compare them to the availability and prices of the goods back home. So here we are in the biggest mall in Kishinev called Moldova. And you gotta admit, that's a pretty cool name. Let's go check it out, how it looks inside. And here we are in your typical supermarket, just to look at how much the food is. So it's 20 of these to $1. So this is about $2 per kilo for tomatoes. You have avocados, which are gonna be expensive. Okay, so as you can see there, you have some lemons, which are like $1.50, a little bit less than $2 per kilo. Here you got the bread. This is like 50 cents. We have baguettes for 25 cents. This is $10 per kilo, etc., 10 per kilo. And this right here is typically the cheapest cheese in these kind of countries. Российский cheese, and this is less than 10 per kilo. Я просто снимаю, рассказываю друзьям дома. Да. And so this is gonna be less than $10 per kilo, and this is exactly $10 per kilo. You got maslины, which are olives. I love these. These are awesome. And so as you can see, that's the price per kilo. This is what is that? $7.50 per kilo. That's like what is that? Like $5-6 per kilo. This is a little bit less than $10 per kilo. Here you got your pastas. $1 for the whole thing, for kilo. $1 for 400 grams. Etc. One thing about stores in this part of the world is that you're typically not gonna have your name brands that you're used to in like Western Europe, US, Canada, etc. You might have a few here and there, like H&M, Zara, but it's gonna be limited. And so instead you're gonna have local brands selling, similar type clothes. But if you're used to the big brands, you will have to kind of adjust your expectations and go for the local brands if you need to buy something. And then there are the people. In my opinion, the very best part of being in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, it's impossible to ask someone something without having them tell you their entire life story, their love and frustrations for their country, and even which politician is specifically responsible for all the problems in their country. Moldova is no exception. I chatted with taxi drivers about everything under the sun, but my most memorable conversation was with an older lady who reminded me that all people on this planet have more things in common with one another instead of differences. I enjoyed our conversation very much.
И это доказательство, что действительно, вот хотя мы начали от буквы, как мы до чего дошли, потому что даже и в этом произношении, но если человек не знает грамматику, не знает, или может ему легче выговориться вот на русском, что он националист, он экстремист, как обычно вот так, это я говорю на румынском.
As I do on all my trips, I enjoy being a local, even for only a few days. I rode all trolley buses around and even went to a remote neighborhood away from the center in order to see how regular working class people live. I can't say the neighborhood was in any way memorable, but the restaurant I discovered served delicious Balkan cuisine, which I haven't had in many years. Alright, so I just arrived in a different area of the city. This is no longer the center. This could be just your regular, outside neighborhood where people live and they work in the center. And we're gonna go and try to find some food. And this is kind of what the neighborhood looks like. Right? Just kind of your typical neighborhood. Not in the center. It looks like the rain is starting, which is strange, but it's not that bad. Let's go and see if we can find some food real quick. And here it says the tree of Yuri Gagarin, Дерево Юрия Гагарина. This is a very, very famous Russian astronaut, cosmonaut, who was первым космонавтом. He was the first man in space in October 1966. So this thing, it's really hard to explain. It's kind of like burger slash lula kebab. Really, really good actually. Amazing. I haven't had this in ages. It's really good. In Moldova, as in the rest of Eastern Europe, there isn't a huge middle class. There are lots of poor people, but also a sizable number of rich people. In fact, the store owner I started chatting with on my last day in the country complained about the lack of jobs, but also pointed out that if you have money, you can have a great life here. 5 years ago, I would have shrugged at that comment because, well, that's true everywhere. But now, after having lived in Kiev in my adult life, I understood exactly what he meant. Having money in a country like Moldova will literally change your life, whereas having money in a place like New York makes you somewhat marginally better off. I had my breakfast there, and if I had to guess, most people are not going to be walking there like I did. I think they're going to be driving there, because it's a nice place, good food, and just around me, some really good development right here. Look at this, completely different than, for instance, on the other side. So there's some nice places to live here if you have the money. Only problem is that if you buy a place over there, your view is gonna be that. That is until they build something similar, something nice as well. Then you're gonna have a nice view. But that's the same situation all over Eastern Europe. Anywhere you go, that is something you're gonna be kind of dealing with. And just like that, my trip was over, and it was time to head back to the airport. I can't say I needed another week to explore this city, but I would have surely welcomed another day to explore perhaps another neighboring city or town, or even wander around a random neighborhood. There was just something about Kishinev and Moldova that captivated me and left me wanting to explore it further. However, I didn't leave empty-handed. Besides a large number of delicious sweets at the airport's duty-free for Marina and myself, I also had a few important takeaways. First, you can't compare an Eastern European city to a Central European or let alone a Western European city. You can't compare Kharkov to Bratislava or Kiev to Warsaw. They're just not comparable. For several months, I tried my best to compare a city where I had lived for many years, Kiev, to a city where I'm living now, Warsaw. But I constantly failed. It was only now that I figured out why that was. Warsaw is simply in a league of its own. On the other hand, I personally found Kishinev unique and interesting and would have a difficult time comparing it to any Western city. Second, while it's common knowledge that living is very different from merely visiting, what not many people realize is that this is 50 times the case in a place like Eastern Europe. That most likely explains why I returned to Poland super revitalized and refreshed. In Kishinev, I lived in an amazing apartment, smack in the middle of the center, and went out to any restaurant I wanted without checking the menu in advance. Locals who earn local wages probably wouldn't be able to do all that. As someone who was living a fairly local life in Kiev, I know that if I had ever decided to settle down in Kishinev, my life would be very, very different as compared to merely visiting the capital for a few days. Of course, as they say, you only understand the country where you're living when you leave it for any amount of time. Living elsewhere gives you an invaluable perspective about your former residence or home that you just couldn't obtain via any other means. That couldn't have been more true when I returned to Poland. Landing back in Warsaw introduced me to the spacious and modern Chopin Airport, but it was really when I stepped out of arrivals and searched for my taxi in a maze of parking lots that the airport reminded me of a mini JFK, New York City's main international airport. The similarities didn't end there. The drive back to Ochota reminded me of Belt Parkway, the main southern Brooklyn highway that I've taken countless times before when getting from the JFK to my apartment in Brooklyn. When I didn't think Warsaw could impress and amaze me even more, it ultimately ended up doing just that. And this thing is really, really good. Well, that was a pretty interesting place. Food was good, was a bit too loud, but the atmosphere was pretty good. Very kind of chilling place to spend some time with friends.